My odds of making it out alive were not good, but now that my graffiti was done, it was time to focus on improving those odds as much as possible. I really wanted to be able to use my flashlight underwater, so I removed the lanyard from the light, placed it back in a Ziploc bag, and wound the rope around it and the bag tightly several times before tying it and then tying the loose end of the rope to my wrist. I ensured my possessions in my pack were securely tied in an orange garbage bag and then tied it to my belt with heavy fishing line once more. I would proceed as far as I could with my pack on my back, but if it got too narrow, I would remove it and drag it along behind me with a heavy fishing line. "And now for my secret weapon," I proclaimed. I went back into the corridor and searched for some loose rocks. There weren't too many, but there were some, and of those, few were as smooth as they needed to be. But eventually I had gathered a few handfuls of pebbles and stones that weren't too jagged. Now it was time to experiment. The water tunnel entrance was too small for a proper experiment, so I went back to the pool instead. I placed one garbage bag inside another, waved them through the air, and securely knotted them, trapping the air inside. I walked out into the water and tried pulling it under, watertight and quite buoyant, as expected. Walking back to the shore, I placed several small stones into the bags and repeated the process. This time it was not nearly as hard to pull under the water. I repeated the experiment several times until finally the bag sank, but very slowly. It was close to being neutrally buoyant, which is to say it would tend to stay at whatever depth I pulled it to without me having to drag it along the ceiling for being too light or along the floor for being too heavy. Either problem would be likely to rip a hole in my bag of air, which was the only practical way for me to extend the distance I could travel. I would swim until I couldn't bear it any longer, then untie the knot, put my lips to the hole, and try a sucking in a breath without gulping any water in the process. I wasn't sure it would work, which of course is why I'm experimenting in the pool first. It took several unpleasant mouthfuls of water to finalize the technique of taking a breath, but it could be done. Then I filled my pack with more rocks. I need to be weighted down myself, otherwise I'd be scraping along the ceiling as well. Now, it was finally time. I crawled back to the tunnel opening, put on my backpack, and slid into the hole. I hesitated on the water's edge for a moment, charged my flashlight, took a deep breath, and dropped below the surface. I must be terribly careful, for these tunnels could be filled with loose silt and rock. A single disturbance could shake them free, and light or no light, I would not be able to see with that trash suspended in the water. The tunnel stretched out beyond the range of my flashlight. It was oval-shaped, taller than it was wide, perhaps 3 feet tall by 2 feet wide. It was a tight fit, but it meant that I could drag myself along without having to try to swim one-armed. I held one arm with the light out in front of me and held the bag of air in the other. I spread my legs out to either side of the tunnel wall, braced myself, and pushed off, propelling myself forward down the tunnel. Brace, push off, brace, push off. I could already feel my lungs burning. I blew out some bubbles to relieve the pressure. Brace, push off, brace, push off. Too much, too much. I slowly let out the last of the air in my lungs and untied the knot in the bag. Then my flashlight went out. Damn! It's okay. I can do this by feel. My hand holding the bag just needs to find my mouth. No big deal. I place the bag up against my mouth, relax my grip around the neck, and squeeze the bag with my other arm, blowing a big fat bubble of precious air past my greedy lips. Amazing! The strength returned to my limbs, and the haze cleared from my mind immediately. I retied the bag, recharged my flashlight, and pushed on. Brace, push, brace, push. It seemed to go on forever, when suddenly my eyes noticed a change in the light. Whereas before the ceiling of the tunnel had reflected some of my flashlight's beam back down towards me, the ceiling had disappeared and was replaced with a boundless blackness. I reached up with my hands and broke the surface of a new cave. Lord, is there anything as sweet as a breath of air? What's more, there was solid rock beneath my feet. I could stand up, doubly blessed. The water reached up to my chest, and stretched for as far as the eye could see in every direction, except back the way I came. There was no sign of land, only the solid cave wall. There was but one thing to do: go back to the wall and walk along the edge until I found something to stand on. The water was more likely to be shallow along the edges rather than the center anyways. I plodded along slowly, the water varying in depth between shoulder and waist height as I walked on for many minutes. Then I saw it. Those same 2 bright points of light I had seen before, reflecting the beam of my flashlight back at me, but from a higher point of elevation than the waterline. Now this was a pickle. What was probably the only piece of dry land in this whole abyssal grotto was occupied by some unknown beast that was silently watching me from an elevated position. I had the momentary advantage of being in waist-deep water, so retrieving my sharpened trowel from my pack was a simple task. Weapon in hand and flashlight in the other, I opted to backtrack the way I came, hoping that if I returned to my point of origin and continued past it, that perhaps I might find some other piece of land to rest upon. I had just turned and was about to retrace my path when I felt it. Even to the dull senses of a human, down here, in an atmosphere of complete deprivation of every manner of stimuli, feeling this was like hitting a wall. A breeze, the softest, gentlest butterfly kiss of a breeze in the world. But it was there, and it was coming from the direction of those eyes. Beast or no, nothing would prevent me from chasing that breeze to its source. I mounted my pack on my arm as before, flashlight in hand, sharpened trowel in the other, and I advanced on the pair of eyes. As I grew closer, the eyes didn't fade or turn away. Eventually, I heard a low growl. I continued my advance, and saw the outline of a rock formation that jutted up, perhaps 8 feet from the waterline, with the eyes perched upon it. But somehow I could still not make out the shape of the beast, just the 2 glowing dots. Keeping the rocks in sight, I began to circle around it, looking for a more approachable shore than the sheer wall of rock I beheld. This would be very difficult to climb, and I was hoping for an easier way. Circling around, I eventually found a rocky shoreline, and jutting rocks that, although steep, formed something of a staircase. It occurred to me that if this was the only way up, I would be blocking a growling beast, and forcing its back against the wall, or against a cliff anyways. But I simply had no other option. This breeze was my single best hope to escape this cavern, and avoiding a fight now meant a slow death later. I could only hope it had some other way down, or would be so frightened that it would rather leap into the water. Of course, it could always attack me. Either way, the time to find out was now. I climbed the rocky slope. The sound of a loud snarl reached my ears, and the glowing eyes beheld me as I advanced. And then they suddenly vanished, and I heard the tapping of nails on rock as it melted away. Relief washed over me. There was another way up here, and the creature, which I could now guess the identity of, had yielded ground. The tapping of nails and the familiarity of that snarl made me guess the identity of my fellow traveler, lacking the retractable claw of a feline and possessing the familiar snarl of a canine. I was down here with a wolf. A large wolf.